Ideas Part 4. What are we missing? Well, whenever you have a list, there are some items on that list and some left off. I seem preoccupied with the medieval synthesis, so where is Aquinas and Dante? Does this parade harbor some sort of anti-Italian sentiment? And how about other blind spots? If so, Sandra Harding will help us find them. She's one of the philosophers I studied in college and icon to my third-wave feminist classmates. But will she help us recapture the synthesis or destroy it once and for all? What synthesis? I've talked already about forms in nature being accessible to our senses and abstracted in our minds, but we could also talk about it in terms of knowing the truth, seeking the good, and finding beauty in the world. It's a synthesis because these things go together. But what is Harding's view? We'll come back to it later, but here is a sneak peek.
In this great epistemological shift, what we see is the decline of the view from nowhere, what Donna Haraway memorably referred to as the God trick, the ability to see everywhere in the world from no place at all.
Mostly, this video is on Elizabeth Anderson's article, Feminist Epistemology, an Interpretation and a Defense. Published in 1995, the abstract Feminist Epistemology. Yikes! Well, I'm not trying to define or summarize feminism here. I'm just reading the article, nothing political here. Feminist epistemology has often been understood as the study of feminine ways of knowing, but feminist epistemology is better understood as the branch of naturalized social epistemology. We'll run into this term, naturalized epistemology, again and again. Quine coined the term. It deals with science. Think natural science. This paper is about science, and it studies the various influences of norms and conceptions of gender and gendered interests and experiences on the production of knowledge. It's the old question again. Where do ideas come from? This understanding avoids dubious claims about feminine cognitive differences. Do you believe in that dubious claim? Some people do. Is there male cognition versus female cognition? If so, maybe that's why science has traditionally been a boys' club. Anderson disagrees. To her, cognition is cognition. Reason is reason. This enables feminist research in various disciplines to pose deep internal critiques of mainstream research, which is, strangely, but it's very good news for the boys' club. It means that their old project, science, is still worth doing. Now it can just be done better, which means, of course, including rather than excluding women, obviously. And if all this paper was saying is that sexist jerks should stop being sexist jerks, well, then that's not interesting. Yes, it's true. Yes, it needs to be said. The paper's saying something much more interesting. One thing Anderson is not saying is that there needs to be a women's-only science, a totally different new women's-only science to compete with or replace traditional science. The article begins, Feminist epistemology is about the ways gender influences what we take to be knowledge. All knowledge. Consider impersonal, theoretical, and scientific knowledge, the kind of knowledge privileged in the academy. Western society has labeled this kind of knowledge masculine and prevented women from acquiring and producing it. Anderson continues in the next section, the gendered division of theoretical labor, to document sexism in science. Yes, it's there, still there, sadly. All kinds, from the explicit to the subconscious, from elementary school through postdoc work and into the careers of women scientists. The effects do not end there. The influence of gendered concepts and norms in our knowledge practices extends far beyond the ways male and female individuals are socialized and assigned to different roles in the division of labor. To see this, consider the role of gender symbolism in theoretical knowledge. That's the key term here, gender symbolism, leading to the heart of her paper, these two sections. Number 1, the hierarchy of knowledge. It is a characteristic of human thought that our concepts do not stay put behind the neat logical fences philosophers like to erect for them. Like sly coyotes, they slip past these flimsy barriers to range far and wide, picking up consorts of all varieties. And, in astonishingly fecund acts of miscegenation, or interbreeding, shocking to conceptual purists, leave offspring who bear a disturbing resemblance to the wayward parent and inherit the impulse to roam the old territory. Finally, ideas with agency, ideas on the loose, the philosophical guardians of these offspring, trying to shake off the taint of sexual scandal, but feeling guilty about the effort, don't quite know whether to cover up a concept's pedigree or, by means of the discovery, justification, distinction, deny that it matters. I mean, who cares where the theory comes from just so long as it works? Wait a minute. Should we care? The latter strategy can work only if, like keepers of a zoo, the philosophers keep their animals fenced in. Feminist epistemologists track these creatures sneaking past their fences while their keepers dream of tamed animals happy to remain confined. Don't blame us, Anderson said. We did not release the coyotes, we're just following them. The most cunning and promiscuous coyotes are our gender concepts. In a manner befitting their own links to sex, they copulate with anything. Please explain. Feminist epistemologists note that there is hardly any conceptual dichotomy that has not been modeled after and in turn used to model the masculine-feminine dichotomy. Mind, body, culture, nature, reason, emotion, objective, subjective, tough-minded, soft-hearted, and so forth. The point isn't that all men are like this and all women are like that, obviously not. The point is that we think using these types of concepts and dichotomies all the time. Categories. Can't get away from those things. And these scandalous metaphorical unions. Scandalous because they're so clearly false. Have you ever noticed that men have hearts and women have minds? These scandalous metaphorical unions generate conceptions of knowledge, science, and rational inquiry, as well as conceptions of the objects of these inquiries that are shaped in part by sexist views about the proper relations between men and women. Feminist epistemologists investigate how these concepts are informed and distorted by sexist imagery. It's the distorted part that's the problem for science. Gender symbolism appears on at least two levels of our knowledge practices, in the construction of a hierarchy of prestige and authority among kinds and fields of knowledge, and number two, in the content of the theoretical inquiry itself. And those are the two subsections that we're focused on here, number 1 and 2. Consider first the ways different kinds and fields of knowledge are gendered. At the most general level, impersonal theoretical knowledge is coded masculine. Personal knowledge, the kind of knowledge that is inseparable from the knower's identity, biography, and emotional experience, is coded feminine. The laws of thermodynamics versus growing up without heat. Theoretical knowledge is thought to be masculine in part because it lays claim to objectivity, which is thought to be achieved through the rigorous exclusion from thought of feminine subjectivity of emotion, particularly interests and values. Objectivity is not a given. You know this if you've ever seen Judge Judy. Each side claims that his or her version of events is objective. Establish that, and you've won the case. This does not mean, of course, that men always win and women always lose. It just means that these uses of gender symbolism have epistemic import because they structure a hierarchy of prestige and cognitive authority among kinds of knowledge, and hence of knowers, that is homologous with the gender hierarchy. As men in sexist societies express contempt for women and enjoy higher prestige than women, so do theoretical knowers express contempt for those with merely personal knowledge of the same subject matters and enjoy higher prestige than they. Echoing the sexist norms that women must obey men, but men need not listen to women, the gender-coded hierarchy of knowledge embodies the norm that personal knowledge must submit to the judgment of impersonal theoretical knowledge, while theoretical knowledge has nothing to learn from personal knowledge and may ignore its claims. Which type of knowledge is better? Science will tell us. Well, what does science say? Science says check with the data, and Anderson's example involves dogs, and that people's success in training their pets is inversely related to their training as behavioral sciences. That was a dig. Anderson quotes an example here. The behaviorist is trying to test which response is stronger in the dog, fetching the stick or eating. So here's the experiment. He'll take the dog, and then pour out food while simultaneously throwing a stick. What will the dog do? Will it fetch or feed? Neither. It'll just sit there and look at its owner like he's nuts, which he is. One of the reasons why behaviorists tend to elicit such boring behavior from animals and humans is that they don't give them the opportunities to exhibit a more impressive repertoire of behaviors that respect for them would require them to offer. Where did this bad experiment come from? It's a really bad experiment. Where did it come from? Well, the man assumed that the dog's relationship to the owner would, because it's personal and emotional, that personal relationship. Do dogs have personal relationships? Well, it's individual, and therefore it would have to take a backseat to the, quote, science, the objective science of conditioning, which it didn't. Why should it? The gender-coded hierarchy of knowledge extends to specific subject matters and methods within theoretical knowledge. The natural sciences are harder, more like the male body and hence more prestigious than the social scientists and the, quote, soft humanities, supposed to be awash in feminine emotionality and subjectivity. You've probably used those terms yourself, calling chemistry a hard science and sociology a soft science. Those terms might even kind of make sense to you. But why? Well, now you know. Mathematics is coded masculine and is the language of physics, the most prestigious science. Through their closer association with physics, quantitative subfields of biology and the social sciences enjoy higher prestige than subfields of the same discipline or branch of science employing a qualitative, historical, or interpretive methodology. Translation: the hierarchy exists not just between disciplines, but within disciplines as well. I wonder how far down it goes. So interpretive anthropology is designated less masculine, scientific, and rigorous than physical anthropology, which deals with, quote, hard facts, like fossil bones. In each of these cases, the socially enforced norm for relations between fields of knowledge mirrors that of the relations between husband and wife in the ideal patriarchal, i.e. bad, family. The masculine science is autonomous from and exercises authority over the feminine science, which is supposedly dependent on the former's pronouncements to know what it should think next. Thermodynamics can lecture the child about heat, but the child is not allowed to tell the theory what it's like to be cold. Try that and you'll get a nice pat on the head, which is problematic, because this gendered hierarchy of theoretical subfields produces serious cognitive distortions. The result has been a history of findings that lack robustness because they are mere artifacts of the experimental situation. Anderson provides more examples of bad experiments, this time from psychology. These experiments weren't just bad because they were designed by sexist jerks. They were designed by people who were acting like sexist jerks. I can't call it. They're not. That'd be unfair to say that about these old experiments. But that's not the interesting conclusion. Science doesn't just lack concern for women's experience, but for any personal experience. For example, animal behaviorists ignored the personal knowledge male policemen had with their police dogs. But don't worry, help is on the way. In the light of cognitive distortions caused by the gender coding of the types and domains of knowledge, feminist naturalized epistemologists would recommend that we no longer model the relations between different kinds of knowledge on a sexist view of the authority relations between men and women. End of part 1. Before we get to part 2 of Anderson's paper, let's return to Sandra Harding and the concepts of standpoint theory and strong objectivity. Quote, starting off research from women's lives will generate less partial and distorted accounts not only of the women's lives, but also of the men's lives and the whole social order. So don't start your research by asking him about his paycheck, assuming that that information will tell you something or everything you need to know about their lives. Listen to her experiences, not the global economy. In fact, listening to an individual's experiences will tell you more about the global economy than you might get otherwise. So objective knowledge is safe, for now.
I was looking for the most macho name I could. Strong objectivity, none of this weak little femi subjectivity for me. I wanted to really, it's a very powerful term that has objectivity that has a home in law schools and public policy.
But we're only half done. Part 2, the content of theories. Gender symbolism figures in the content of theories as well as in their relations of cognitive authority when concepts of human gender relations or gendered characteristics are used to model phenomena that are not gendered. For example, evolution. There's nothing feminine or masculine about survival, but consider the fact that evolutionary theory tends to delineate the unit of natural selection, the entity accorded the status of an individual, at the point where the theorist is willing to use complex and cooperative rather than competitive models of interaction. This is a key sentence, but unfortunately it's not all that clear. You've heard of natural selection. The, quote, unit of selection is that thing which natural selection selects. Anderson considers 2 different examples of evolutionary theories. Yes, there are multiple takes on evolution. One of these theories focuses on organisms, the other on genes. She's not really interested in evolution. And I'm not talking about evolution here either. What we're saying is that these 2 theories, one talks about individual organisms, the other talks about individual genes, and both theories agree that among individuals, whatever they are, antagonistic competition predominates and mutualistic interactions are downplayed. The individual, organism or gene, is considered selfish in relation to other individuals. When the organism is taken to be the unit of selection, it is represented as selfishly competitive with respect to the other individual organisms. But then again, at the same time, within the individuals, cooperation prevails. I can't say that word. I can't pronounce it. The same thing understood very differently. Hey, is that a group of players all fighting for a spot on the starting roster? Or is it a well-run practice where everyone is working together to make the team better? Is this a group of genes cooperating in an organism or genes ruthlessly fighting to survive? It's both, obviously. But science, for some reason, prefers or has preferred the selfish metaphor. Why? Well, now you know. Cooperation is modeled after the family, often the patriarchal family. The cells of an individual organism cooperate because of the bonds of kinship. They share the same genes. The constituent part of the individual cell cooperates because they are ruled by a wise and benevolent patriarch, the master molecule, DNA, which autonomously tells all the parts of the cell what to do. Why do we think like that? Solely on the basis of information contained within itself. Thus, evolutionary theory models the biological world after a sexist and androcentric conception of liberal society in which the public square is governed by competition among presumably masculine selfish individuals and the private sphere of the family is governed by the male heads of household enforcing cooperation among its members. Competitive, professional, cooperative family. Why do you think like that? Turns out professionals cooperate and siblings are competitive. All right, stereotypes are stereotypical. But what are these stereotypes doing in the biology textbook? Wait, stop the presses. Darwinism is sexist. Is that the headline here? No, that's not the point. The point is that these theories, these scientific theories that claim to be totally objective, like born from the head of Zeus or something like that, they came from somewhere. And even though this sexist Victorian model is not rigidly or consistently applied in evolutionary theory, it does mark theoretical tendencies which can be traced back to the fact that Darwin modeled his theory of natural selection after Malthus's dismal model of capitalist society. Again, Anderson is not dragging Darwin. You could if you wanted to, but that's not what she's doing. Taken by itself, the fact that evolutionary theory employs a sexist ideology of liberal society to model biological phenomena does not have a straightforward normative implication. It does not necessarily make the theory good or bad. Defenders of the theory can appeal to the discovery justification distinction here just because the theory had its origins in politically objectionable ideas of social contexts does not mean that it is false or useless. Evolutionary theory is extraordinarily fruitful and empirically well confirmed. Is the synthesis in trouble? This connection seems right. It seems strong. We're dealing here with a tradition of hardcore empiricism called positivism.
Getting accurate records of women's situations around the world is extremely difficult. It's very difficult to get. And it's a very important project because you can't tell what you're looking at until you count it. I mean, I know that's very regressive, but I can't help it. I was brought up a logical positivist. I'm a recovering logical positivist. I practically have to go to a 12-step program to keep from falling into my bad old ways. But I do think if you're going to make policy, it helps to know what you're looking at. And getting accurate data on women, I could go into the details, but every feminist social science researcher in the room knows how difficult it is, in fact, to get that.
Is the synthesis in trouble? Can ideas be bad and sexist and yet still true and useful? Plato would be scandalized. The model theoretical view of theories, whether they work or not, widely used by feminist empiricism and feminist postmodernists, more on them later, to analyze the roles of gender in the construction of theoretical knowledge, affirms the epistemic legitimacy of any coherent models, hence of any coherent sexist models in science. Another headline here. Self-described feminist philosopher calls a sexist model legitimate. How could she do that? Well, why not? Empiricism places no a priori constraints on the things that may constitute useful models for phenomena. Fit with the data. That is the only criteria. This is empiricism after all. Anything might be a illuminating model of anything else. That's a radical statement. So empiricists can offer no a priori epistemic objections to modeling non-gendered phenomena after gendered ones, even if the models are overtly sexist or patriarchal. Such models may well illuminate and effectively organize important aspects of the objects being studied. After all, we're asking our theories not just to fit with the data, but also to organize and explain the data and suggest new experiments. So the trouble with using sexist gender symbolism in theoretical models is not that the models are sexist. After all, you can't blame a Victorian for being a Victorian. The trouble lies rather in the extraordinary political alliance and rhetorical power of sexist gender ideology, which generates numerous cognitive distortions. The ideology of possessive individualism falsely identifies autonomy with selfishness and falsely contrasts self-interest with cooperation. No more false choices. Maybe we should call this theory not naturalized feminist epistemology, but both and ism. When used to model phenomena in evolutionary biology, it leads to a false identification of peaceful passive consumption activity with violent competitive behavior and to neglect mutualist interactions among organisms. Guys, we have to be extra careful with our operational definitions. No, it goes beyond that, because although technical definitions of competition avoid false identities and dichotomies, biologists constantly turn to colloquial or common everyday meanings to explain their findings and to frame research questions. In this way, the use of a term with established colloquial, common, everyday meanings in technical contexts permits the simultaneous transfer and denial of its colloquial connotations. We begin to see the cycle from culture to science, back to culture, now scientifically proven. Sometimes a closed system can be a vicious cycle. Is there any way to break this? Yes, find out soon. In identifying the scientific outlook with that of a man who has outgrown his tutelage, cut his dependence on his mother, and is prepared to meet the competitive demands of the public square with a clear eye, the ideology of masculinity tends to confuse seeing the natural world as indifferent in the sense of devoid of teleological laws with seeing the social world as hostile in the sense of full of agents who pursue their interests at others' expense. Wait a minute. Devoid of teleology? Lacking purpose and design? Well, I guess that's inevitable. After all, you said that our ideas could be true even without being good. This confusion tempts biologists into thinking that the selfishness their models ascribe to genes and the ruthless strategic rationality their models ascribe to individual organisms, mere metaphors, however theoretically powerful, are more real than the actual care a dog expresses towards her pups. In other words, we don't understand what's happening scientifically until we can make this scene seem selfish, which is silly. That's ideology run amok, whenever the theory is more real than the facts. The ideological power of gender symbolism sometimes gets the better of otherwise careful theorists. It can generate conceptual confusion in ways that are hard to detect and obscure theoretical possibilities that may be worth pursuing. The most reliable way to tell when the use of gender symbolism is generating such cognitive distortions is to critically investigate the gender ideology it depends on and the roles this ideology plays in society. In other words, biologists have something to learn from feminist theory after all. I repeat, biologists have something to learn from feminist theory after all. Moving through the rest of the paper, and androcentrism, or man-centeredness in scientific theories, treating the male as default or tailoring the theory around him. Anderson explores the option of a woman-centered or gynocentric science, which she says, quote, could be fun. To find out how, we rewind to that odd couple, feminist epistemologists and postmodernists. Yeah, both look for theories that work in specific contexts, but whereas empiricists like our friend Harding believe the external world exists and just wants to know it better, more objectively, postmodern feminists like her colleague Donna Haraway say traditional objectivity is a myth, an impossibility. Worse, it sounds nasty, militarized, male-dominant, and must be replaced by a new, embodied, feminist objectivity run by a new feminist rationality. Pardon the oversimplification here, but what I'm saying here is that Harding and Anderson are trying to improve or save the traditional science project, whereas Haraway wants to put it out of its misery. Back to Anderson. Feminists are interested in upholding the equality of all persons, not the domination of women over men. That is her position, but how? If naturalized epistemologists, scientists, use space-age technology to explore the universe of knowledge, feminist naturalized epistemologists could be said to specialize in the discovery of wormholes in that universe. Science fiction fans, especially from the 90s, know about wormholes, shortcuts linking distant places. Anderson, specifically in the paper, locates these wormholes in Quine's web of beliefs. They make the web both stronger and more flexible, better able to respond. These are special black holes, can we call them standpoints, invisible to the general theory, that discredited view from nowhere. They hold important, overlooked data. And if you don't take them seriously, this dog will look at you like you're crazy. And Anderson continues with sexism in scientific theories that asserted that women are inferior to men. Anderson gives examples from medicine and IQ tests. The question is, how our evaluation of theories should change once their sexism is brought to light. Should we just ignore this problem, or should we destroy the theory? Well, we know what she thinks. What does Anderson say? Feminist naturalized epistemologists offer a more nuanced response to the presence of value judgments in scientific inference. Even, quote, good science can incorporate such value judgments. Probably it has no choice. From the perspective of an individual scientist, it is not unreasonable to use any of one's firm beliefs, including beliefs about values, to reason from an observation to a theory. So values can be brought into the system. The synthesis is restored. No, it's changed. When Dante and Aquinas looked for the one true theory of the world, they took it for granted that once discovered, this theory, because of who designed it, would be good. Since Quine, or at least since Quine, it's been taken for granted that multiple theories can and could work, can fit with the data. It's up to us now to police our theories. Teleology purpose is back, but we have to take responsibility for it. Good news, though, now these theories can be used as mirrors. We understand they're mirrors that we can use to look at, to analyze, and improve ourselves. Let us sum up with the conclusion here. The local character of naturalized feminist epistemology, keyword local. Everyone agrees on that. In reading the project of feminist epistemology along naturalized empiricist lines, I have tried to show how its interest and critical power do not depend on the global transcendental claims that all knowledge is gendered or that rationality as a regulatory epistemic ideal is masculine. That would be the postmodern position. That's not Anderson. Naturalized feminist epistemologies may travel to distant locations in the universe of belief, but they always remain inside that universe and travel from gender to science by way of discrete, empirically discoverable paths. Faith in science, pro-science, yay science, just careful science, watch those footprints. They have an interest in constructing new paths to empirically adequate, fruitful, and useful forms of feminist science, and in breaking up other paths that lead to cognitively and socially unsatisfactory destinations. I wanted to recapture the synthesis. Note the gendered terms there. And we have, maybe, but truth is now empirical adequacy. Goodness is being socially satisfactory. And the ontology of beauty, which used to have more to do with symmetry, is now beautiful because it is always offering new paths. All the paths by which they propose to change these influences accept rationality as a key epistemic ideal. Haraway called this rationality, quote, riddled with repressions, but here would Plato, maybe Plato wouldn't be so against this after all. And empirical adequacy is the fundamental goal of acceptable theories. This ideal and this goal are in principle equally open to pursuit by male and female inquirers, which is a relief to me. It should not be surprising that the feminist researchers who make it their business to study the contradictions and incoherence in our conceptions of gender can improve theories by exposing and clearing up the confusions they inherit from the gender ideologies they use as models. Research informed by feminist commitments makes new explanatory models available, reframes old questions, exposes facts that undermine the plausibility of previously dominant theories, improves data collection techniques, and shifts the relations of cognitive authority among fields and theories, all of which promotes creativity, which is a good idea. So the goal is not to call myths bad or good, but to use them, or see them being used, or both. I don't know.